we're going to learn how to make what I call a significant woman's ring. And it's a simple ring that has multiple parts, but it's a simple stone-setted ring. So these are just some examples. You have the shank, which is the actual ring part. You have the buttress, which is this decorative twisted wire. And then you have this bezel. This bezel is the part of the ring that holds or secures the stone inside of it. And then you have this base plate underneath. And so these are just some examples. This is a darker kind of weathered ring. Same stuff. Very simple, very nice, elegant ring. We also have a ring. We have, depending on the stone, the stone, the shape will determine your ring. But this is an oval, and we have circular. So right now we're going to talk about the materials. The materials that you're going to use for this ring are very simple. These are this is a double half round piece of metal, and if you see it, if you see, it's kind of two circles attached together, two half circles. Okay, that's double half round, and that's used for the shank. We have a serrated bezel, which is just slightly taller than the curve of the stone that will wrap around for the bezel. We have this twisted wire that we call buttress, this twisted buttress. And then we have the base plate. And then the stone. We're using an oval stone, but any stone, any shape will be fine. It needs to be a cabochon, which means it's got it could be circular or rounded on top, but it's flat on the bottom, so it sits flat. And notice it has this little curve. The buttress has to be slightly taller than that curve, like so that when the buttress is bent over, it secures that stone to the ring, and so it doesn't move. All right, the first thing that you're going to do on this project is you're going to pick your stone. Now the stone is we have different colors that you'll see during class, and this one is just a white simple stone. But what you're going to want to do is you're going to get a piece of tape. You're going to fold it over so that half of it is still sticky and the other half is not. And then you're going to just stick your stone on, and I call this a leash. And then you're going to put your name on it and your period number. Okay. You could do this with the materials. You could make it a little bit bigger and attach your materials to it so that your materials don't get lost in your box. That wouldn't be a bad idea, because sometimes your box can get a little full. And so you just have a leash that you need that attaches all your stuff. Now the bezel is the first step in making the significant woman's ring. You need to fit the bezel around your stone. Now this bezel is a lot longer, and we cut them this way so that you have some material to work with. But what you're going to do is you're going to take your bezel and you're going to wrap the bezel. I'm going to try and show you. You're going to wrap the bezel around the stone. Okay, and it could be any shape you want, the stone. But this is oval, so we'll wrap it around the oval. Now, we're going to overlap it. If you can tell, we've got the bezel is right here. The end of the one bezel is here, is right there. And then we're going to kind of overlap it a little bit. Now, you're going to take a magic marker, and I actually just like to see where the bezel is, and I like to just put a mark on the outside and then on the inside part on both of these pieces of the bezel, so that when I take my stone out, I see that on these two pieces I have a mark. Now this is serrated bezel, so you kind of want to make it look continuous. So to do that, you're going to try and cut inside these teeth so that when you solder it together, it looks like it's seamless. It just goes teeth, mountain, valley, mountain, valley, mountain, valley. So I'll take this and I will get some flush cutters. I'll just get these flush cutters, and I'll make sure that it is straight, and I will pinch it or cut it. Now when you cut it, make sure you keep this metal and you put it in the bone box. Okay, so I cut it there, and then I look closely and I cut it right in that valley, straight up and down. You don't want to cut it like this because it won't match up correctly. You need those ends to match up correctly. So I'll cut it as straight as possible, straight up and down. And then I'll take these pieces and I'll put them in the bone box. Now, if I did this correctly, my bezel should fit perfectly around the stone. So I kind of hold on to the bezel and the stone, and I press it down. Now, if you look, it's a little bit big. The bezel is a little bit bigger than the stone. Now, this is one thing. You don't want it to be too big. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually look, and I'm going to go and cut off. I'm going to cut off two of these mountains here. So I'm going to put the flush cutters in there, and I'm going to cut off the mountains. And there's a little piece right there, and I'll put it in the bone box. So I'll take my stone and make sure it fits. And it may be a little small. If it fits perfectly, great. If it's a little small, that's okay. We can work with it. But we don't want it too big. If it's too small, we can stretch it like a ring. But if it's too big, we have to then cut it and then reshape it. So this may be a little bit too small. It may be less than a millimeter, but that's fine. It'll work. We can stretch it, but as long as it's not too big, we can work with it. So now that it's sized correctly, we are going to now go and solder this bezel together. All right, now we have the bezel that it fits correctly. And so what we're going to do is we're going to solder this side. We're going to solder these two sides together. Now, we learned when soldering our silver bands that we can solder by putting solder on the base or on the charcoal block and soldering it up, or putting it on a third hand. We're going to actually use the third hand. Now, this is really thin metal, so we've got to be careful. So the first thing we're going to do, just like always, we're going to dip it in the boric acid and the denatured alcohol, and we're going to, puts a protective coat on it. Okay, once we put it there, we're then going to get our third hand, and we're going to make sure that this is set up correctly, that the ring, that it is perfectly aligned. that the edges meet up next to each other perfectly so that it is seamless. Okay, and we're going to carefully put this in the third hand so that the seam is on top, right on top. Now, once again, it doesn't have to be circular because we're going to make it circular later on the mandrel, just like with all of our other rings. So we're going to take this and we're going to solder it. So we're going to take and we're going to get our we already put the boric acid on. Now we're going to get some flux, and we're just going to paint a little bit of flux on the bezel. And with the smallest torch head possible, we're going to take this and we're going to lightly burn the flux. So it just kind of evaporates that material. So that when we put the solder on, it doesn't jump. Now this is a small piece of metal. We do not need a lot of material, a lot of solder. So we're going to carefully put the solder on right on that seam. And we're going to zoom in so you can see. And we are going to start soldering. Now, when you solder, once again, you're using the smallest torch. The smallest torch, and the hottest part of the torch is the tip of the blue. So I'm going to just start heating it up. I need the solder. Before we solder, I put the solder on the top, and I'm soldering underneath so that the solder will flow through the bezel onto the inside. I don't put the solder on the inside of the ring because that will change the fit of the bezel on the stone. So you always put it on the outside so that it doesn't change the fitting of the bezel. So I take it, I do my best, I'm going back and forth, I'm heating up the seam because I want it to go inside. The solder flows where the heat is. So I heat all around. You'll see the solder start to melt, start to ball up. And you'll see it turn that liquid mercury. Okay, just like that. Now it's not perfect, easy to see, but it did melt all right here. Okay, so you've got to be slow and steady with this. Do not force the solder. And once again, use the smallest torch head that we have. So we'll take this and we'll go and we'll put it in the water. And now we can go check the size of the bezel. Okay, now that we dumped it in water, we don't put it in the pickle bath because if we put it in the pickle bath, we'll lose it because everyone else will put it in the pickle bath, and there's no markings on this. So we don't put it in the pickle bath. It's soldered, and if you can tell, it looks pretty good. It looks like those mountains look continuous, and that's kind of what you want. So we'll take our stone from the leash and we'll kind of just put this stone on the ground. And what we're going to do, and since it's oval, we'll kind of form this bezel around the stone. And as I push down, you can tell it doesn't fit. It's just slightly too small, which is fine. If it was too big and there were gaps in between this area right here, then we would have a problem. So you don't want to see gaps. You want this to go all the way down right here, but you don't want to see gaps in this edge right here. If there was a gap in the edge, you'd need to take your flush cutters and you'd need to cut off one or maybe two of the little mountains, these little the little serrated part, and then you would go back and solder it again. But since it's a little small, we can work with that. So I'm going to take my stone, put it back on the leash, and then I'm going to I need to stretch this out. So first I'm going to take my files, and I'm going to take a red file, and I'm just going to lightly sand where the bezel, where the soldering was. And you can actually get like a yellow file too. Green might be a little bit too abrasive, but you're just kind of getting rid of all of the extras material that may have been there. You don't need to do a lot, but just enough to make it kind of indistinguishable. Okay, so now, once again, the stone doesn't fit. So I'm going to go and I'm going to get a mandrel, and we have some small mandrels. We have some small mandrels here that are both circular and oval. The normal ring mandrels are a little bit big, so they probably won't work very well. But what we'll do, we have this oval mandrel, if you can see, it's oval. So you'll take the oval mandrel and you'll just put this oval mandrel on. The bezel on the oval mandrel. And just like before, we'll take the mallet and we just slowly hit it. We don't want to overstretch it. If we overstretch it, we will need to cut it and then resolder it. So I'm going to check this. So I stretched it, and you can see it's now oval. These ovals are the same shape as these mandrels are the same shape as the other oval as the stone. So I get my stone, I'll put it down, and I will try and push the bezel on the stone. And it does not fit. It's just still a little bit too small. You want the stone to fit easily through. So, like if I put my stone on the table, I want to be able to just push the stone through, and I can't right now. So I'll make sure I'll release the stone. I'll go back to my bezel, and I will keep hitting. Now, if it's just a little bit too big, what you can do is you can get a steel plate. And with that steel plate, you can roll the bezel on the steel plate. The pressure of the mandrel and the steel on this silver will help it, will slightly expand it. And so that's a good way to just slowly move it bigger, to make it bigger. And this is kind of just a jeweler's trick to do that. You kind of just figure out how to do these things. So I'm going to take my stone. Oh, it's almost there. It's almost there. Needs to be a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to put it on the mandrel. And I'm going to hit it with the rawhide mallet. And I'm flipping it back and forth so that it opens up, or it widens evenly on the top and bottom, because the mandrel is tapered. And if I need to, I can take this and roll it just a little bit. I'll flip it over. Now these are oval mandrels that work pretty good, but if it's an irregular shaped stone, you'll put it on the mandrel and then have to reshape it. So we'll put it on, and it fits perfectly, right? If I zoom in here, I see that the stone can fall down and it fits perfectly. I don't have to force it, and it comes out evenly on the top and bottom. Now I need to be able to fit the stone in perfectly from the top. Why? Because the base plate is going to go under the bezel, and that won't work. You won't be able to. You're going to be installing the stone from the top. Okay, so I take my stone and I make sure it fits. Now, once it fits, I make sure that this bezel does not change its shape. So I've got to be careful. Now that the bezel, now the bezel fits, and it fits really nice, and you can see that there's no gapping in between it. So if I go in, there's little to no gapping on this edge right here. If there's large gaps on either of these sides, you will need to cut the bezel, and then you'll need to resolder. But there's no real gapping. It actually looks really nice, really snug fit. So that's the bezel and fitting the bezel.